This video reveals how Nevada's own politicians turned a $100 billion tourism machine into a slow-motion crash. If you've ever saved for a Vegas weekend, chased comped rooms, or planned that one bucket list trip, this is about your experience and why it suddenly feels riskier. But if the strip still glows, everything must be fine, right? However, the numbers whisper a different story. Yet the real twist didn't start on the casino floor. It started in policy rooms far from the neon. Although marketing grew louder, visitor trust grew quieter. Therefore, the shows stayed dazzling, while the margins went dark. On the other hand, rivals abroad quietly opened their doors wider. If you want Nevada to thrive, don't punish your best customers with hostile signals and red tape. Do make every step frictionless and welcome them back. Want to understand how a state built on hospitality started pushing guests away? Stay with me, because what happened behind the scenes is stranger than any headline. And before we dive in, if you enjoy uncovering the stories that powerful people try to bury, make sure to subscribe. Trust me, what's coming next, you don't want to miss. It started quietly. No headlines, no panic, just numbers that didn't add up. Hotel check-ins dipped a little, convention bookings slipped, airline traffic fell below forecasts. Nothing dramatic, yet. But by early 2025, the decline could no longer hide behind averages. Visitor numbers to Nevada dropped 17% in a single quarter, the sharpest fall since the pandemic. However, this time, there was no global crisis to blame. The casinos were open, the weather perfect, and the world was traveling again. So why was the entertainment capital of America suddenly losing its crowd? Analysts called it a market adjustment. Politicians called it temporary. Yet locals saw something different. Servers watched their tips vanish. Bellhops stood by empty luggage carts. Taxi lines that once wrapped around the block were suddenly gone. Although the strip still shimmered at night, behind the neon, a quiet panic spread. Room rates were being slashed midweek. Casinos started closing tables earlier, and convention organizers, the lifeblood of Las Vegas business travel, were quietly shifting events to Texas and Arizona. Therefore, this wasn't a seasonal slowdown. It was the first crack in Nevada's economic foundation. On the other hand, politicians refused to see it. They insisted the tourists would come back, because they always did. But this time they wouldn't, because what drove them away wasn't a lack of money or interest. It was something far more dangerous, a loss of trust. Stay with me, because what happened next turned a minor slump into a full-scale collapse. What triggered the collapse wasn't bad luck. It was bad leadership. For years, Nevada's politicians bragged about protecting local jobs and cutting foreign dependence. But in practice, those words became policies that scared away the very people keeping the lights on. It started with tariffs. The state's alignment with aggressive federal trade policies made everything from airline tickets to hotel imports more expensive. Then came the rhetoric. The constant talk about foreign buyers, outsiders, and protecting Nevada for Nevadans. On paper, it sounded patriotic. In reality, it was a warning label to the world. You're not welcome here. However, this wasn't just politics. It was economics in disguise. Because every outsider those politicians pushed away spent thousands inside the state each year. Yet, lawmakers were too busy winning headlines to notice their economy bleeding beneath the surface. Therefore, while they argued about sovereignty, casino floors grew emptier. On the other hand, rival states began quietly poaching Nevada's conventions and high-spending tourists. Texas launched direct campaigns to attract international conferences. California's tourism board doubled its outreach in Canada and Europe. Even Mexico stepped in, offering new entertainment hubs at half the cost. Still, Nevada's leaders insisted the downturn was temporary. They blamed inflation, travel fatigue, even climate change. Anything but their own policies. But what really destroyed trust wasn't a single law or speech. It was the pattern. Every new rule made visitors feel less wanted, and every public statement pushed them one step further away. If you want people to come back, you don't build walls around your economy. you build bridges. Nevada forgot that. And the moment it did, its most profitable customers found new places to spend their money. But this was only the beginning, because once the tourists disappeared, something even more fragile began to collapse: the local economy itself. When the visitors stopped coming, Nevada didn't just lose tourists, it lost oxygen. Every casino chip, dinner reservation, and concert ticket was part of a much bigger ecosystem. And once that system broke, everything around it started collapsing. Hotels were the first to feel it. Occupancy dropped below 70% for the first time in a decade, forcing resorts to cut staff. However, the real damage happened off the Strip, in the small restaurants, taxi companies, and local suppliers that survived on tourist spending. Their margins disappeared overnight. Servers who once pulled $300 nights in tips now fought for half-empty shifts. Retail clerks stood behind aisles of untouched souvenirs. Even high-end retailers on Las Vegas Boulevard, once packed with tourists holding shopping bags, began closing early to save on electricity. Yet the damage didn't stop there. As hotel revenue fell, so did state tax collections. Billions in tourism-generated income vanished, leaving massive budget gaps in counties built on hospitality. Public projects were delayed, schools saw funding shortfalls, and municipalities quietly began freezing hiring. Therefore, the layoffs spread like wildfire. On the other hand, business owners tried to adapt, cutting hours, raising prices, even turning to automation. But you can't automate warmth. You can't replace service with software when your economy runs on people. And the biggest shock? Real estate. Investors who once treated Las Vegas condos as golden assets suddenly started selling. Housing inventory doubled in under 90 days. Property values fell, and with them, local confidence. Still, politicians kept smiling for cameras, claiming the market was recalibrating. But every taxi driver, every casino dealer, and every laid-off hotel worker knew the truth. This wasn't recalibration, it was collapse, hidden behind polished press releases. And while Nevada's economy struggled to breathe, other places, ones that had been watching closely, saw their opportunity. Because while Nevada pushed visitors away, its competitors were already opening their arms. While Nevada doubled down on pride, the rest of the world doubled down on opportunity. What the state lost, others quietly claimed. California was first. Its tourism board launched a global campaign targeting the same visitors who once flooded Las Vegas. Billboards in Toronto and London promised sun, shows, and no politics. The message was clear. We have everything Nevada has, minus the hostility. Texas followed fast. With a booming convention scene and looser regulations, Dallas and Austin began stealing major conferences that once belonged to Vegas. Hotels there filled with attendees who would have spent their nights under the neon lights of the Strip. However, the shift didn't stop inside U.S. borders. Mexico saw the cracks forming and moved fast. It streamlined its travel visas, offered tax breaks for foreign property buyers, and poured millions into high-end resorts near Cancun and Puerto Vallarta. Canadian winter tourists, once regulars in Nevada's casinos, began swapping poker tables for beach bars. And although few noticed it at first, the trend spread overseas. Portugal's Algarve coast, Spain's Canary Islands, even the Caribbean. They all capitalized on Nevada's reputation crisis. While lawmakers in Carson City argued about protecting local culture, these destinations focused on one thing: making people feel welcome. Therefore, every new speech or restriction in Nevada sent more travelers elsewhere. On the other hand, its competitors built trust: one flight, one booking, one friendly policy at a time. By late 2025, global tourism analysts estimated Nevada had lost nearly $11 billion in redirected spending, money that once fueled its hotels, shows, and small businesses. But what hurt most wasn't just the loss of cash, it was the loss of loyalty. Because once travelers realized they didn't need Vegas to have Vegas-level luxury, they never looked back. And while Nevada's leaders insisted recovery was just around the corner, a harsher truth was taking shape. The state hadn't just lost its tourists, it had lost its reputation. reputation doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes quietly, one decision at a time. For decades, Nevada built its brand on freedom, fun, and fantasy. It was the place where everyone could belong, no matter where they came from. But in 2025, that image cracked. Visitors didn't just cancel trips, they changed their perception. To them, Nevada was no longer the land of possibility. It was the land of politics, paperwork, and bad headlines. However, perception spreads faster than facts. And once travelers start to feel unwelcome, no amount of marketing can fix it. Airports noticed first. International flight routes were cut. Vegas-London, Vegas-Toronto, Vegas-Tokyo, once packed year-round, now running half-empty. Yet, the state's leaders shrugged it off, claiming it was temporary turbulence. Although, deep down, they knew it wasn't. Therefore, while the billboards screamed, "Welcome to fabulous Las Vegas," the numbers whispered a different truth. Foreign arrivals had fallen 29% year over year. Hotel tax revenue dropped below pre-pandemic levels. And convention attendance, once Nevada's golden ticket, had fallen to a 10-year low. On the other hand, rival destinations didn't just take advantage, they built infrastructure to keep those tourists forever. Mexico partnered with Canadian banks for easy payments. Portugal created English-speaking health clinics for retirees. Even Caribbean nations introduced property incentives for long-stay visitors. Nevada, meanwhile, was still stuck arguing about who to blame. Instead of fixing the leaks, politicians kept debating whether the ship was really sinking. By the time they agreed there was a problem, the passengers had already found another cruise. Trust, once broken, doesn't return with a marketing slogan. It returns with time, and Nevada had just run out of it. But here's the twist most people don't realize. The collapse wasn't just financial. It began to infect something far more critical: the state's identity itself. Once trust disappeared, the damage became permanent. You can rebuild hotels, reopen casinos, or relaunch ad campaigns. But you can't rebuild confidence overnight. By mid-2025, Nevada's economy looked fine on paper, yet the numbers told a darker story. Tax revenue fell by billions. Unemployment in tourism-dependent counties hit record highs, and local governments quietly began cutting corners just to stay afloat. However, the real cost wasn't visible in spreadsheets. It was visible in people: bartenders picking up second jobs, dealers moving to Arizona for better pay, small business owners closing after 20 years because foot traffic simply vanished. Therefore, what began as a dip in tourism turned into a structural breakdown. On the other hand, lawmakers still framed it as a short-term fluctuation. But the short term was gone. This was the new normal. Housing markets reflected it next. Condo prices in resort-heavy areas dropped nearly 25%, leaving investors underwater. Commercial vacancies doubled as souvenir shops and local eateries shuttered. Even public services started to crack. Infrastructure projects were delayed, and counties, once fueled by tourist tax money, struggled to fund schools and maintenance. Yet, instead of course-correcting, politicians kept talking about independence from foreign visitors. That sounded bold in press conferences, but it was economic suicide in practice. You can't replace international revenue with domestic traffic. The math doesn't work. The average weekend tourist spends a fraction of what a foreign visitor does. And when half your state's economy relies on that spending, those fractions matter. Although leaders kept promising a rebound, economists saw the truth. They warned that Nevada's losses weren't cyclical, they were structural. Because once the flow of foreign money stops, it doesn't pause, it redirects. And by 2025, that redirection was already permanent. Nevada's airports were half full, its hotels half booked, and its confidence, once larger than life, was gone. The bright lights were still on, but behind them, the engine that powered Nevada had gone silent. But this story doesn't end with one state. Because Nevada's downfall wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. a warning for every politician who forgets that tourism isn't built on ideology, it's built on people. Nevada's collapse isn't just a local disaster, it's a national warning. Because what happened here can happen anywhere. When politics begins to shape economics, and pride replaces practicality, even the strongest industries can crumble. America's tourism machine, worth over $200 billion, depends on one fragile thing: how welcome visitors feel. Yet, just like Nevada, other states are starting to forget that. Arizona depends on its snowbirds. California thrives on international conventions. New York relies on global business travel. But if policy turns hostile, if rhetoric becomes exclusion, if short-term politics outweigh long-term vision, then the same collapse waiting in Nevada is already knocking at their doors. However, this isn't a hopeless story, because every mistake Nevada made can still be a lesson for anyone willing to listen. Protecting local jobs doesn't mean pushing the world away. It means inviting them in, smarter, safer, and with respect. That's what rebuilt economies do. That's what smart leadership looks like. So, as the neon fades and the tables sit empty, one truth remains: you can't gamble with trust. Once it's gone, the house always loses. If you've made it this far, you already see the pattern most people ignore. But this is just one story. There are dozens more where power, politics, and money collide, shaping the world behind the headlines. So, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, understand what's really happening behind the scenes, and never fall for the polished version of events, subscribe. Because the next story might just change how you see everything.